get started. And if everybody can please mute their microphones, that we won't have any bounce back of sound. Welcome everybody, and most importantly, welcome to you, Sam. At Beth Jacob, we had the privilege and honor of meeting Sam a number of weeks ago when Simone Sass had arranged that Sam would come to Beth Jacob on a Sunday morning in order to say Kaddish for his father, Zichrono Livracha, and it gave us the real privilege and honor to meet Sam and to meet many members of his family also. And it really was a very, very beautiful morning, and it was a great chance for us to meet Sam. And when we did, I said that we have to have Sam come and speak to the whole community. Mensch tracht in gut lacht. So we thought we'd bring Sam to the whole community in person, but at this point, none of us are able to come in person. But Sam very graciously agreed, and much thanks to his wonderful daughter, Ilana, who helped arrange all of the logistics. So Sam very graciously agreed to speak to us over our GoToMeeting site and to share with us his experience. And Sam says that he feels it's a mitzvah to tell his story and to share it with us. It's certainly a mitzvah for us to hear it. And we really appreciate, Sam, all the time and effort and heart and neshama that you put into all that you do, and making sure that people of all generations, the young ones also, will have heard the story from someone who actually lived it. And without further ado, Sam, I give you the floor, and thank you so, so much for sharing with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. By the way, I want you to know that I am the son and grandson of a Hasidic family. And my grandfather, may he rest, Oliver Scholler, may he rest in peace, was leaving Poland and had a bon voyage party in 1938, November of 1938. And when at that time in Poland, it was a big deal. Then somebody goes to...
Listen, do not unmute yourself.
To Jerusalem, to the Holy Land, to Eretz Israel. And during that party, and I was only then 9 years old, because I want you all to know that I'm now 90 years old. And that was 82 years ago, when I was at that party as a kid, and I happened to have been a nosy kid, and an uncle of mine noticed me kind of listening in to what the young men were very perturbed about what was going on. And I was sensitive to it, and he realized my sensitivities. So I asked him, could you explain to me what is this all going on about? So he told me, listen, we just got the news about Kristallnacht that happened in Germany when the German Nazi goons attacked Jews, killed some Jews, burned synagogues, destroyed Jewish businesses and all this and so on. And then at the same time, he told me, I want to tell you, you know, you could feel the clouds of war in the air. And I want you to know that if God forbid something happens, I want you to go to the Holy Land and join your grandfather when he's there in case you are in trouble. And he gave me a whole lesson in geography to go to Vienna, from Vienna traveling by train, going through
Not for me.
Turkey, and then going through Syria into the Holy Land. So I had a lesson in geography. And also, the most important thing that happened at that time, that he ignited in me the spark of Zionism. After being both persecuted by Polish anti-Semitism and with the advent of the German threat to Europe, that was a great, exciting idea. I understood now. Don't forget, I was 9 years old. Lo and behold, on September 1, 1939, all of a sudden, the Germans marched into Poland and they went through Poland like a knife through butter. Without meaningful resistance, they occupied the whole country within 3 days. And immediately upon their occupation, they took Jewish hostages as a safety measure in case something happens to any of the Germans, they would execute them. True enough, they executed 2 of my uncles in an adjacent town. Before we knew it, my father was taken as a hostage. Now, our family, our extended family in the town of Yavozhno, where I was born, consisted, and the adjacent towns consisted of about 108 people, of whom only 5 people survived the war. But having such an extended family, and my father, who was the oldest son of my grandfather, who had 10 children, being taken hostage at the time when 2 uncles of mine were shot to death by the Germans, created havoc in the family, and we had to call all our financial resources to see if we can bribe some German officers in order to get my father released. Apparently, they were finally successful in doing so. And when he came back, we couldn't recognize him because his beard was totally shaven off and he was unrecognizable from the image I had of him before he was taken in. But we were thankful that he came back. Now, as soon, right thereafter, the Germans have issued edicts constricting Jewish education and movement and activity. For example, they forbade Jewish kids from going to schools. They forbade Jewish kids from going to schools. They confiscated our businesses. We had various businesses, a printing establishment, stationery stores, a bus corporation, whatever it is, they confiscated and put in a German Gauleiter to control, and all the earnings of the businesses went towards the German effort. This is not enough, but the Germans went in. I just want you to have an idea of the chutzpah, which is gall, that the Germans had, because they were, as they were riding in with their trucks and jeeps, they were singing Heute gehört uns Deutschland, morgen die ganze Welt, which means today we own Germany, tomorrow the entire world. Deutschland, Deutschland, über alles in der Welt. which means Germany is above everything else in the world. And with this kind of audacity, they went to occupy the rest of Europe and enslave most of the Jewish population. Now, and the population of Europe as well. But what happened, most fearful for us at the time, that they issued extremely restrictive edicts against Jewish businesses, Jewish education. Now, in order to keep their war effort industrial complex going, they needed a labor force because they conscripted most of their youth and able-bodied men towards the war effort and their dream to attain control of the world, as they claimed to. In doing so, they conducted intermittent raids to take able-bodied men into German labor camps so that they can perform the work necessary to keep the German industrial complex going. By doing so, they also, in the process of those raids, took innocent civilians, Jewish people who cannot perform the services for the German Reich, and had them dig trenches and had them stand on top of the trenches and shot them to death to fall in the trenches. The Germans conducted a massive propaganda attack against the Jewish population and promoting hatred. It was awful that we couldn't go to school. So since our parents and the Jewish community as a whole values education so much, we established clandestine schools at different homes where different grades would attend and get schooling. But because of the constant raids that the Germans were conducting, they took, during those raids, my older brother into a labor camp. And I was the next oldest in the family, so I was in charge of taking my younger siblings, my sister and my younger brother, to their respective age schools. And would you please take the dog away? And they as in doing so, it was imperative for me to be very careful. Now you imagine I was then about 11 years old, that I had to protect my siblings. And in doing so, I learned how to prevent and avoid being caught by the Nazis. And I had many very, very short brushes with their raids and at different times. And things were going pretty bad because at that time, the town I was born in was about 18 miles out of Auschwitz. The Germans converted an officers' camp in Auschwitz to an extermination camp. And they decided that they will concentrate the Jews in ghettos to facilitate their taking hostages and able-bodied people to labor camps.
I don't know, the square footage.
It was an awful way for us to live because we had no means of having sources of food because the Germans took all the earnings that my father made in the business and everything was rationed. It was a terrible time. But as time went on, because our town was close enough to the German border, where the Germans decided, in order to facilitate their gathering of able-bodied men, to concentrate Jewish communities into ghettos. So they decided to declare the town we were in Judenrein in Germany, which means cleansed of Jews. That meant, and they did it with all little towns where there were Jewish communities, and forced them into a ghetto. At that point, they forced us to go into a ghetto near the town of Sosnowiec, where there was a larger Jewish community, and they established a ghetto outside of the town of Sosnowiec in the village of Schrodolal, where they were there was a concentration of about 35,000 people. Now, once we were taken into that ghetto, which was surrounded by a barbed wire fence, and the Germans were clever enough to establish a self-government Jewish Judenrat, they called it in German, which is Jewish leadership. The Jews, there was a Jewish commander, Jewish police that would govern inside the ghetto, but it was all subservient to the German command and desires, and they basically executed all the plans the Germans commanded them. Now, you may imagine a community of 35,000 people, which is restricted by rationing and everything else, and yet underserved without normal food supply. People were starving of hunger, not enough of anything. However, and since we had no means of survival because there was no income. There was a question, what do we do about getting food, which was very, very costly in time of rationing. And my father was forced still to go to our town and work for the Germans. Yet we didn't have the money to afford it. So my older brother was already at that point in labor camp. So my father said to me, you know what? By the way, my Hebrew name is Shmuel. They call me Shmulek. He said to me, Shmulek, we are tired, desperate need. We need. So why don't you do this? There's a way, because we were in a basement floor of the ghetto where I could. So we established a hole where I could sneak out from the ghetto and take the streetcar to the Polish outside population of the ghetto. He said to me, look, what you can do, you dress like a non-Jew, and we would start trading in the ghetto, in the Jewish community, were various craftsmen that they could produce shoes, clothing, etc., which was rationed in the outside world, and it was needed in the agrarian community of the Poles outside the ghetto, while foodstuff was very short of in the ghetto. So he said to me, why don't you we're going to give you a few bags of shoes and clothing. I said, look, I don't know anything about how do I do it. He said to me, it's simple. We buy a pair of shoes for $10. You sell it for 12. We buy a suit for 20. You sell it for 25, and so on. Then you go outside and buy food stuff or whatever's needed in the ghetto, and so on. It made sense, and I was forced to do it because we had no other way to survive. And as you know, necessity is the mother of invention. Even so that I had to go on a streetcar with the Poles, who were very anti-Semitic at the time, were almost ready to hand me over to the Germans. So I had to be very careful of what I did and what I acted. And as time went on, I got pretty good at it. But it was a very dangerous thing. Number one, I had to fear the Poles. Number two, I had to fear the German Gestapo police. And the Germans, at one time, I had a situation as I was approaching together, a German policeman stopped me and asked me to stop. And I started running, and then I was afraid because he was running after me towards the ghetto, and I was afraid. Luckily, I had the presence of mind. Mind you, I was 12 years old at the time, to take out a bottle of booze that I had in the stuff that I was bringing into the ghetto and drop it on the floor in the hope that he will pick it up and get busy with it. Sure enough, it worked. And I was fortunate to get into the ghetto. And because we had a downstairs apartment on a hill in the basement, and my parents happened to have seen it, I was getting accolades from my parents that I did a good job. That made me feel good at the time. Look, it was tough because my sister got sick and she had gangrene in the leg. She was taken to a hospital. and the Germans conducted intermittent raids. And so my father walled off a section of the apartment to build a bunker, a hideout place, so that when the Germans conducted the raids, we could hide in it. So, which we did from time, every time. I was not yet a bar mitzvah boy at the time, and I could not go to a regular shul because assembly was restricted, and things were being very tough economically and otherwise. My sister was in the hospital because of gangrene, and we were very, very scared about what's going to happen. We knew that she will be taken by the Germans into Auschwitz in case there's a raid, because it's wide open. And as we were hiding in the hideout and worried about everything, at one point in a hideout which was built for 14 people, there were about 22 people in the hideout when the Germans surrounded the entire ghetto. And it was terrible because there was hardly time to breathe, hardly any space to breathe. And we were there, and because it was a basement unit, we could hear the roaring of German trucks above us on the road, and hear the loudspeakers announcing that all the residents of the ghetto have to go and assemble at a huge lot that was in the center of the ghetto, and so on. But we hoped that by hiding, we would be able to escape everything and be okay. But then all of a sudden, we heard in the unit above us the loud steps of German Nazi soldiers shouting, "Juden raus, all Jews get out and go to the assembly place," and so on. And as they were doing it, one woman happened to be the mother of a small baby. The baby started crying, so she took a pillow to subdue the cries of the baby, but it was to no avail, because by then the Germans heard us and took axes and opened the floor above us, ordering us to report to the place of selection in the big lot to where the assembly was, because they were liquidating the ghetto. We didn't know then what it means at all. Unfortunately, the woman, in its panic of covering the baby's face to subdue its cries, suffocated the baby, and it was an awful feeling. The woman was crying for suffocating the baby, as well as for exposing all of us to have to go to the assembly place. It was an awful way. It was terrible. When we went out to go to the assembly place, you could see the people walking with their belongings and hoping they will have a way to survive or whatever. But it happened to have been a cloudy day, and you had that strong feeling of these people marching to their death like that. When you came to the assembly place, it was awful sight. cries and everything. The German Gestapo, the Nazis, with dogs and whips, were all over the place, whipping people and making selections. My father, my mother, and my youngest brother, my sister was in the hospital. We knew she's going to go to Auschwitz in an extermination camp. So my father decided that I separate from my mother, and I go with him, and my mother would go with my youngest brother to the selection place. And when I saw what's going on in the selection place, even then, by that time, I was just about 13 years old, and I had a bar mitzvah. I couldn't have it on a Saturday. I had it on a Monday because they read the Torah Mondays and Thursdays from the different parshas, as you know. In any case, so my father decided I should go with him. And when I saw what was going on, I said to my father, look, I don't want to be a burden for you in your ability to survive, because you are able-bodied and they're making selections. You go there and you probably be selected with the able-bodied people. I would see what I can do to join you. And the ropes dividing the sections were all over the place, meant by Nazis with whips, etc. And my father went, and I couldn't go because I was, of course, very young, and I knew I would be destined to go to Auschwitz extermination camp. So luckily, I saw that Gestapo was handling a couple with 2 children, and they were taking away their father. The children started making a commotion, and while this commotion was going on and the Gestapo was busy with them, I snuck into my father's section and was hoping to be able to go to the section with able-bodied men that would be taken into labor camp rather than extermination camp. But I realized that everybody else around me was a lot taller than me, and I said, what the heck am I going to do here? Because the Germans were going to make another selection. Luckily, I realized it was a construction site, and I was able to take a cinder block at the back row, because the rows were 5 people deep, and I stood in the back row. So when the Nazis came to make the selection, asked my father, what is your profession? What do you do for a living? And he said he's a mason. So he pointed him to go to the able-bodied section. And then he asked other people their profession, etc. And finally comes to me. He says, what are you doing? What the hell are you doing? So I said, I'm a mason's helper. So he told me to go to the section where my father was, to able-bodied men. Of course, he didn't see that I'm standing on a cinder block, and I was reticent to move, as he was telling me, because I had to wait, because if he seen me stepping off a block, I would go to the extermination camp. Fortunately, as he went further to make the selections, so behind his back, I snuck into my father's section, and I was able to go with my father to a labor camp called Annaberg, where we were shoved on a truck while all this was going on. waiting for the truck to fill with prisoners of able-bodied men. And I could, as I was on top of the truck, looking over the crowd of people and hearing these cries of women being departed from their husbands, mothers from their children, and babies being thrown at random on the sidewalk. It was bedlam. It was awful. It was unbelievable, painstaking. And I hoped to get a glimpse of my mother, but I couldn't do it. We were taken to a labor camp called Adaberg, which was deep in a forest, surrounded by barbed wire. And I, as a young boy, was very frustrated to be so limited and so surrounded by danger, but I had no choice. My father warned me constantly to be very careful not to go and try to escape because the barbed wire fence is electrified and so on. We were in Adaberg about 3 months. We finished building barracks for another camp. Then the Germans took us to another camp called Blechara. And in Blechara, there were a lot of prisoners. There were about 4,800 of us in Blechara concentration camp. That's where we were issued a number, and my number is 178509, and my father's number was 178508. We came into that camp, and we were given the numbers and issued a striped uniform, which I was too small. It didn't match. I had to fold my, hello? I had to fold my sleeves.
I don't know. I think they're just showing everything now.
I had to fold my sleeves and the bottom of my pants to make it fit. And there was assigned to a barrack with my father, which was three rows high. And I was on the top unit. My father was in the middle unit, and there was another prisoner in the bottom unit. And we were marched every day. This was again, that camp too was in a forest, and we were marched every day to an industrial complex where there were many prisoners of war from Russia, England, France, and so on. I was assigned to a German welder who happened to have been serving in the German army on the Russian front. And he was injured, he was limping. So he wasn't so favorably so favorably inclined to the Nazi regime in any case. So I had a little more liberties. He treated me well. And we were forbidden to have exchanges of any kind with the other prisoners of war, but we were able to communicate. So we found out through the English prisoners of war who were contacted by clandestine radio with England about the Allied advances and so on. As a matter of fact, there were Allied bombs that bombed the industrial complex, etc. We were forbidden to go. We were forbidden to go into the bank into the bunkers to be protected. So we were, now things were so bad. I tried to escape, and the only way I could escape was when there was an Allied bombing took place, and destruction ensued, and the Germans assumed that I was killed in the process. Then there would be no repercussions to fellow prisoners. So in one of the raids, I was able to do it. There was an alarm, and I was able to get out of the industrial compound in the hope of escape. But unfortunately, no bombing ensued, so that I was left with a dilemma. What do I do now as I'm out? If I am missing, and the Germans find out that I'm missing, which they will, they would kill 10 prisoners, my father included. So you can imagine, at the age of 14, I had to go back to make those decisions. I came back and everything was fine, but I had many discussions with my father in the camp, which was awful. Because he was religious, he maintained his kosher dictates, his kosher habits, and wouldn't eat this or that. And I told him, look, God will forgive you if you do this, because under those circumstances and so on. I had a lot of discussions with my father about it. He was very orthodox, and I said, there's a time for everything, and you just can't do it. And he told me, look, you gotta have faith. And I said, look, I said to my father, I'm imprisoned here like an animal. I'm treated like hell, and I'm starving from hunger, and people die left and right of starvation. Why should I live? Why should I live and work for the Germans and then die? It's better that I commit suicide. So my father said to me, you gotta have hope, you gotta have bitachon, you gotta have tikva, you gotta know that at God's help, you will get out of here. So we discussed it back and forth. Finally, he told me, and I told him, look, Dad, you believe in God, and how can God, and I had a very contentious relationship with God. He says, how can God Almighty, the loving God, be so tolerant of that kind of slaughter and mistreatment of our people and so on? And I said to him, look, it's unbearable and so on. We had a discussion back and forth. You imagine a 14-and-a-half-year-old kid having that kind of discussion with the father. And then finally said to me, look, don't get despondent, don't go nuts, because with God's help, you're going to be out of here. I says, Dad, forget about it. Don't preach to me about God at the time when I'm treated like a dog. And then my father said to me, look, I'm going to tell you a story about 2 flies. Then I said to him, don't tell me stories about flies. You see the German buckle, what the Germans have? The German Wehrmacht, the German soldiers had a buckle with an insignia, SS insignia. And the SS insignia, and then the inscription read, "Gott ist mit uns." They claim God is with us. So if God is with them, and you pray to God, what gives? I think as a 15-year-old, 14-year-old kid, I had a right to ask that question. So my father said, look, I'll tell you the story about two flies that fell into a dream. One of them was a believer, the other one a non-believer. But you are so set on non-believing, I'll say one of them was an optimist, the other one was a pessimist. They both fell into dream. The pessimist had no belief in himself or in God or anything. He let go of the wings and drowned in the cream. The optimist, who was a believer in himself and God and so on, decided that there gotta be a way God's gonna help me to get out of here. Started flapping the wings back and forth, kicking with the legs until he made butter out of the cream and got out. So he says, let that be your lessons. You know something? It was true. What happened? With God's help, one day we were walking from the industrial complex in the winter to the concentration camp. We were shackled as we were walking, and I was in the middle of a row of 5, shackled to both hands. I see this woman walking there. And as we got closer, I realized that her coat looked like my mother's coat. Sure enough, we got closer. I realized it's my mother, so I kind of nudged because I was shackled. The guy next to me and said, this is my mother. He said to me, look, kid, shut up, because if you're going to be loud enough, the Germans are going to take her in. No, she was able to slip in a note with the contact information in my father's contingent. Now, it was a question of how to get in contact with it. I was able to get in contact. I was able to get in contact through my boss, who had a motorcycle, went to my mom. And she was working in a monastery as a non-Jew. And he brought back some goodies and food and so on. And this is how we knew where she was. So, and I'm skipping because of time limitations over a lot of the story. So when it came to January of 1945, and we could hear the artillery of the Red Army attacking the Germans and so on, we were rejoicing, hoping we were going to be liberated. Then all of a sudden, on the 21st of January 1945, the Germans decided to evacuate the concentration camp deeper into Germany so we can dig trenches for German defenses, etc. Now that evacuation and that march was called in the annals of concentration camp history, the Death March, because we were led out in the deep snow, without anything. All they told us to take is a blanket and a canister. Fortunately for the canister, because they didn't give us any food, so the canister served its purpose because we were able to load it up with snow, which we melted on our belly. And as I told you, there were 4,800 people there. And as they were walking us all day without nutrition. People were starving left and right. They overnighted us in abandoned barns of German villages because the Germans ran away from the Russians. They were afraid of the retribution because they were so cruel in their attack on Russia. They would rather be caught in the American occupation than the Russians. It was awful. We were there for we were walking and people were starving left and right. It was awful. And at one point, on the third day, a German peasant threw a bucket of potatoes at us, the prisoners. My father, who was a very fine, refined, civilized man, wouldn't pounce on it, but most prisoners, when you are starving, will pounce. I remember having caught a small potato, which is about that size, for the which they cooked for the pigs. And I remember that I hesitated whether I should share it with my father. And I want to tell you that it's my proudest moments in life that I resisted my animal instinct and I was able to share with my father. And I want to tell you, I suffered a lot from guilt feelings subsequently that I even had the hesitation. I don't know if people under normal living circumstances like you have and do can understand it. But that's one of the proudest things I ever did. The second proudest thing is my participation in the war of liberation of the state of Israel. Now, in the following day, we saw a sign that marked the town where my mother was working as a nurse, as a non-Jew in a Catholic monastery. So we decided maybe we'll hide in the barn and so on. But we were woken up the next morning, Friday, the 26th of January. And just bear in mind, we already walked for 5.5 days and people were starving. We woke up and we were led out of the barn to the main road. And that particular day, as we were coming to the cross section of the road, my father, who is an Orthodox Jew, and the Germans stopped us because on the road there were many German civilians running away from the Russian onslaught. There were German convoys which were being shot upon by Russian Stuka planes. It was a havoc. We were standing there to allow in those convoys, and it was the anniversary of my grandfather's death. My father, being an Orthodox Jew, respecting the memory of his father, was standing there because we had a quorum, a minyan, to say Kaddish. And as he was saying Kaddish, I noticed the Nazi guard turning his back to us and looking into a sled with his belongings. And as I saw this, I quickly ripped off my striped uniform, under which I had some French sweater and French leather shoes from French prisoners of war. And there was this French contingent that they led by. And I poked my father on the shoulder, says, "Dad, I'm going." And I went. and I crossed. But by that time, I suffered from dysentery. So I managed to get out to the other side of the road where there was a snowbank to relieve myself, and I passed out. I don't to this day remember what happened, but I came to, and I attribute that experience as God saved my life. That was about many hundreds of times during different events where I had really higher guidance. It was just unbelievable. I went and joined all the people, all the civilians, and I was speaking to a German woman who told me how the Jews financed the war, and came to the town where my mother's was in a monastery, and there I was confronted by a bridge over a river with a German sentry, and the guy, the German guard, asked me for legitimation to show some documentation and so on, some ID, and I had none, and I kept arguing with him. So he told me, look, you got to show me ID. And I told him that I worked for a German peasant, and while the Russians planes attacked, we dispersed. I lost him. He had my papers, and I don't have them. Finally, he let me go, and I go to the monastery where my mother worked. You can imagine a kid who was raised in an Orthodox tradition, going to a monastery. I opened the door and I see this beautiful banister with a huge cross on the left. Everything was spick and span. I go behind the cross. I watch the banister. There's this woman walking down. I didn't recognize her. I didn't know who she was. She had a white uniform and so on. I wait there and my heart is palpitating. I wait until she comes back with a tray and cookies. I finally got impatient and said to her, excuse me, please. Do you know a certain woman by the name of Barbara Ziegler? That was her Aryan name. So she thought I'm a chauffeur that came to pick up some people that they are having in that place. And it was an old age home, a nursing home. So she says to me, yeah, I am the one. Who are you actually? She says to me. So I said to her, Mama, don't you recognize me? So she told me to get out. I got out. She put me into another monastery. When she took me to another monastery where my aunt was, which was an agrarian monastery. And that's where I was kept at the end of the war, returned, and the Russian occupation took place in March. So that lasted 2 months. I'm sorry they got to rush it because I got a lot more that I could tell, but time is limited. So I will tell you this. We went back to Poland.
Sam, please don't rush. Sam, please don't rush. Tell your story. Please do not rush.
People can leave if they want.
Okay.
Okay? Please don't rush.
Okay. So we were hoping. I want to tell you, throughout all these events, I had the providence of a higher force in God. And I say, thank God. And I think it was in the zchut of my grandfather and father that I got it. I certainly don't think I deserve it. It was then nobility, which brought us all about and led me to this. And I was there, and from there we returned to Poland in the hope that there will be some family members left and we can go together and form a new life. Unfortunately, my father didn't survive. Things in Poland under Russian occupation were horrible. Anti-Semitism was ingrained both in Poland and also conducted by the Russian occupation. And because it was right after the war, and the black market was sustained throughout, so we went from different towns to see if we can get provisions and earn a living by dealing in the black market. So we went to Krakow. And in Krakow, I met a young boy, Jewish boy. His name was Lolek Alpern, who was throughout the war, he was hidden in a Hungarian Zionist orphanage. And that again reignited. He discussed with me that they're going to go to Palestine, which was then a British mandate, and so on. And that reignited my whole desire. That and the strong anti-Semitic conduct of the Poles, Germans, and the Russians prompted me to join him. And we decided that I'm going to try to join him, providing my mother lets me do it. So when I came back to my mother and I told her about that encounter, and she agreed that I will meet him the following week at the Krakow railroad station and go with him to join that Zionist youth organization orphanage in Budapest, Hungary. My mother escorted me to the railroad station on the given date. And as we were, Lolek was there. The train almost started going because the conductor started the whistle to saying, all aboard. Lola gets up on the train. My mother starts crying, saying, you can't leave me alone in all this. And it was a terrible moment. Finally, I get a hold of my mother and I look, Mom, maybe you could afford to lose a husband and 3 children. I don't want it to happen to me. I have to do something about it. I'm going. I jumped up on the train as it was moving out of the station. It was a horrible interchange with my mother, which I subsequently felt very guilty about, but I joined that movement, that Zionist organization. And of course, I then realized that all the kids had continuous schooling, and I felt a terrific inferiority complex because I didn't have schooling. And luckily, I was able to be guided by teachers and supervisors after a while, and I was able to overcome it. And we were smuggling, we were given instructions in Hebrew and so on by shlichim from Israel, members of the Israeli Zionist movement. And it came, again, to the public that listens to it, I'm telling you just glimpses of the story. If you want, you're welcome to get the book. It's on Amazon, and you can read the entire story. In any case, then we were smuggling the whole group from Hungary through Czechoslovakia to Bratislava, Slovakia, then from there to Prague. And on Christmas Eve of 1945, we smuggled the whole group of orphans, which was a total of about 75, both kids and supervisors and so on, to West Germany, where we were supported by UNRWA and the Jewish efforts, and we were given normal instructions and awaiting our turn to go to Palestine. We then drove, at that time, Palestine being a British mandate, in 1947. Now, this is, again, I'm skipping over a lot of stuff. Between 1945 and 1947, we were driven in trucks clandestinely to Marseille. It was all done by the Haganah and Zionist organization, to Marseille in a villa called the Saint Giraud, which was basically a nut house, and we had to hide. So the British Secret Service we are not exposed, and found out about by the British Secret Service. And in February of 1947, we were driven in the darkness of night to a small boat in Seth, which is the Spanish-French border, where we went on the boat, and we went illegally, clandestinely to Palestine. The boat was about 750 tons, but there were about 1,000 kids on the board with elders and so on. It was horrible. On the Aegean Sea in the Mediterranean, with the waves, people were puking their guts out. Lo and behold, we come to the Palestinian border. We could see Haifa in the dark of night, and we were rejoicing, hoping to be able to disembark and go. All of a sudden, we were surrounded by the British Navy, and the British boarded our board. And I remember to this day, all of us kids were standing and singing the Hatikva, which is the Hebrew national anthem. And they took us to Cyprus, where I was sworn into the Haganah, and I broke a leg in training. We were training. It was very exciting. I mean, I can't describe to you the excitement. We were training, and in training, we were training on a rope to cross a river. So the rope was about 12 feet high over an expansion of about 120 feet. And I was taught how to crawl across on the rope, but I was weak or something, and I let go of my feet. So I was dangling, so my commander told me to jump down And as I jumped down, I broke a leg. Her Majesty the Queen then allowed 500 kids to go to Palestine. And because I broke my leg, I was able to go and join the group in Palestine. And I joined the kibbutz, a youth group in the kibbutz. Now this was, again, August of 1947. And as you know, in November 29, 1947, the UN decided on dividing Palestine into Jewish land and Palestinian land to take place on May 15th, 1948. However, the Arabs decided that they can conquer the Jewish land and not allow the establishment of a state of Israel. And we were mobilized and fought. I was assigned. I was in a kibbutz in Nekba, which was on the borderline of the Negev, the southern part of Israel, and the west. And we were attacked from all sides. I was on the southern front by the Egyptian army, and I lost my girlfriend at the time in the battle at Nekba. It was a crucial battle in which I was injured by shrapnel in that went through my helmet. The battle was so intense that I didn't even realize I was injured until I wiped my sweat off my forehead, and then realized it was red. But I couldn't leave my position. It was one of, but I was extremely happy to participate and fight for the war of liberation and establishment of State of Israel, because I remember while we were in the ghetto and the uprising of Warsaw took place in 1943, I said to my father, you see, that's what we ought to do. That's what we, the Jews, ought to do. They ought to fight, not take this. So I was very proud of this experience. But after a while, I realized that kibbutz life is not for me, because I don't want the community to decide whether my children, if I have any, are worthy of an education, or to be financed, to be educated, and so on. So I decided to leave the kibbutz. I left the kibbutz and I worked in construction for about 2 years and managed to save money. But all of a sudden, in one night, there was a devaluation of the money. So all I saved was worthless. I got very disappointed. And my mother, by that time, left to go to the United States. So I finally wrote to my mother, look, I'm willing to go to the United States and meet you. And that's how I came to the United States as a visitor. And I went to school. I was admitted to school by chance because I didn't have a high school education. They wouldn't admit me. So they took me on at Rochester Institute of Technology on probation. And by the whole circumstances of this are described in the book. We don't have the time to get into particulars on that now. And I went and graduated in 1957 with a BS degree. However, they couldn't grant me the BS certificate because I didn't have a high school diploma. So fortunately, just before the graduation period, there was an exam for an equivalency diploma. And I decided, okay, I'm going in and I'm taking it. So I took the equivalency diploma. And then I was able to get my BS degree in printing technology. And then I got married and I have beautiful kids and grandchildren. And this is the story of my life. And I thank you all very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sam. That was really incredible. If everybody can keep your mic muted, unless you want to ask a question, then unmute yourself and ask a question, please.
So
I can't hear.
they're going to unmute themselves and they're going to ask questions. So let's see who asks a question. Might be easier for them to send the question to you, Rabbi, and or if somebody has one. Yeah, let's see.
I don't
has a
have a
question?
I don't have a question. I just want to say thank you very much for sharing your story and for being a absolute true inspiration.
Thank you.
That's so sweet. That's so sweet.
Thank you.
It's Russell. I'd just like to know if you knew Izzy Nissenbaum.
I hope to meet you all at the synagogue, and I look forward to meet you in person once the pandemic is over. And don't worry about it, it's going to be over.
Thank you. Thank you. Sam, someone had asked if you knew Izzy Nissenbaum.
Say it again. Who?
Izzy Nissenbaum was a member of our shul and also a survivor.
Nissenbaum.
Someone asked if you knew Izzy.
A member of their
No,
shul.
I don't know.
Izzy Nissenbaum. Where was he from?
Originally Germany, and he lived here in Irvine also.
No,
also-
because he's in Laguna Woods, not in Irvine, so no.
Okay. Sam, if you could just mention the name of your book, I appreciate it. I read it cover to cover and it was fascinating. So if you mention the name of your book, then people might want to get that book also to see the whole story.
It's From Hell to the Promised Land by Sam Silberberg. It's available on Amazon. You can't miss it because it's got a concentration camp watchtower in front of it, which I personally designed. And by the way, I had to go back to Poland and visit the site of the concentration camp and everything else, which was a horrid experience for me, in order to do the book justice, to make sure it's done faithfully and correctly. There were many people that wanted to help me write it, but I felt nobody can say it or describe it without living it. And I better do it myself, so I did.
Beautiful. Sam, can you tell us the story? I love the part of your book when you were speaking to your German boss and trying to work out if you could trust him to reach out to your mother. I love that part of the book. Could you share with us how you tried to see if you could trust him to let him know that your mother was alive and if he could reach out to her?
But first of all, there was such distrust of Germans. And when my father got the notice in his contingent that for my mother, and we were seeking a way to contact her, it was a very, very complicated thing. He tried very different angles he couldn't do. So at the last resort, he came to me. He told me, he discussed it with me and he told me, look, maybe you can get your boss to do it, but you can't tell him it's your mother but you can approach him and tell him that you have an aunt that is living in a convent and so on, and maybe he could get in touch with her. Would he object to do it? You approach him. Now, you're talking about me being then 15, almost 15 years old. And I somehow did approach him and told him that I know that and I didn't even use the word I know. I said, I feel that it's possible that an aunt of mine is in such and such a place, convent, and she works there. And I wonder whether you would be able to connect me with her and so on. So he agreed. That's how it all happened.
What a gift from God he was, you know?
You know,
Amazing, Sam. Well, on behalf of the whole congregation, you know,
we tried to get pregnant again, but
But-
from when.
But what I didn't
Yeah.
tell you when I told you the story about my mother, when my mother, the heroism
Yeah.
and determination it took for a woman to go and find her husband under those conditions are indescribable. And what was really in her mind was she understood that her kids were exterminated, and I think was looking for an opportunity to get together with my father and maybe have another child.
Wow.
I mean,
To survive.
to survive
Yeah.
the war.
I have a question for Sam. Were
So
you
just before we go on to that, I'm so sorry. That's the spirit that my father gave to us through my grandmother, was that spirit of that kind of survival. That's what's been passed down. Thank God.
I have a question for Sam. Were you ever able to meet up with your grandfather while you were in Israel?
No, my grandfather died in 1942. He suffered from the anguish of losing all his family.
Well, one day you'll all be together again when Mashiach comes, and they say that we're in the days of Mashiach, and everything, even you breaking your leg was an act of divine intervention, because that's how you got on the boat. I mean, but your whole story is so magnificent, and you have a magnificent neshama, and you're a blessing to the entire community and the world. So thank you, Sam.
Thank you very much.
So sweet.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much, Sam.
Thank you.
You should know we had over
Thank you.
90 people signed in, and many people had more than one person on a computer. So
That's so,
thank
so
you.
beautiful.
It was a tremendous honor for us. And thank you so much, Sam. And we look forward to welcoming you in
זה כבוד
person.
בשבילי לדבר איתכם,
כבוד,
ואני מקווה
כבוד לנו.
שתהיה לי הזדמנות להיות ולהתפלל איתכם בבית הכנסת שלך.
בעזרת השם. בקרוב מקווים. בקרוב מקווים.
אם יש השם, הכל יכול להיות.
זה נכון. זה נכון. Once we hear your story, we know nothing is impossible. That's for sure.
Amen. Hallelujah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Sam.
And I'm looking
And we look
forward
forward to
to
seeing
meeting
you.
you, and especially to pray with Simone's class, your synagogue.
Thank you.
Look forward.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can promise
Sam,
you,
do you ever go
Malia.
back to Israel?
Теперь тебя слышу.
Do you ever go back to Israel?
Аня сказала.
Wait. Someone has a question? Someone has a question. Who is the question?
Do you ever go back to Israel? Are you regularly doing that?
No, the last time we went back was when we buried grandma. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have not. So let me just remind you, he's 90. So traveling to Israel is not so easy. Yeah. But the last time we did was to bury my grandmother in Har HaZitim.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
We're just so grateful for the opportunity to share this with everybody. It's really, really,
Yeah,
really.
and I really
Люди
am
уходят.
looking forward
Подожди.
to be in your synagogue with all those people and meet them in person. And that will be, I guarantee you, it's going to be before Rosh Hashanah.
Amen.
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 We
Amen.
look forward.
Thank you so much.
Such an
Thank
honor.
you so
Почему
much, Sam.
Благодарю.
And we can't thank you enough.
Включил уже.
Okay.
Тебя слышать.
We're going to close the meeting. Sam, thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you hopefully
Thank
soon.
you.
Thank
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Oh my God, so sweet. That's so sweet. Oh my God. So beautiful. Everybody's so beautiful.